11 months after the dinner at my parents' house, I would stand in the service hallway of Bellwether Hall with my mother's hand wrapped around my elbow and 180 wedding guests on the other side of the door. A television crew would be waiting for me beneath a ceiling I knew inch by inch. My mother would look at me with the same careful smile she had used all my life and say, "Don't embarrass us." That night, for the first time, I would understand exactly what she meant by us, but I didn't know any of that yet. At 35, I had become very good at arriving quietly. I came to dinner 15 minutes late from my studio on Millbury Street, wearing a clean navy blouse over work pants and carrying the faint smell of linseed oil no amount of soap seemed able to remove from the skin around my nails. My mother noticed before she kissed my cheek. Her eyes dropped to my hands, paused, and rose again. She said nothing. With Diane Mercer, silence was often the polished version of a complaint. The dining room had been staged for importance. The good china was out. My father had opened wine he usually saved for Christmas. My younger sister, Claire, wore cream silk, and the small diamond Ethan Caldwell had given her 3 weeks earlier. Ethan was her fiancé now, and my mother had prepared for him like a visiting board member. He asked my father about the tomato plants dying along the back fence. He helped Claire carry plates without being asked. When my mother mentioned that Claire had just been promoted to senior communications manager for a regional hospital network, he smiled at Claire instead of looking around to see whether everyone else was impressed. My mother supplied the impressing for him. "She's the youngest senior manager in her division," she said. "Mom," Claire murmured, pleased despite herself. "It's true." Then Ethan turned to me. "And what do you do, Rachel?" My mother answered before I could. "Rachel's taking a little time to figure out what's next." Her tone was light, almost affectionate. Claire gave a small laugh. "She does some restoration work here and there." I looked at her. Claire avoided my eyes and reached for her water. My mother rested 2 fingers on the stem of my wineglass. "Please," she said softly, still smiling toward Ethan. "Not tonight, don't embarrass us." I smiled. I let the moment move around me. For most of my life, I had made myself easy to explain. This time, instead, I heard myself say, "Actually, I'm an architectural conservator." The table went still. My mother's fingers left my glass. Ethan tilted his head. "A conservator? Historic interiors, decorative woodwork, architectural finishes." Claire gave a little shrug meant to make the answer smaller. "Old buildings, basically. Sometimes." Ethan was no longer looking at Claire. "What's the name of your firm?" "Mercer Conservation." His fork stopped halfway to his plate. "Mercer Conservation? Yes, on Millbury Street." Now it was my turn to stop. "That's my studio." Ethan set his fork down and reached for his phone. He scrolled for several seconds, then turned the screen toward me. It was a walnut secretary, late 18th century, with a broken pediment and book-matched veneer. I knew the tiny crescent-shaped loss near the left drawer because I had spent 6 weeks deciding how little intervention it actually needed. "You worked on this?" he asked. I led the treatment. He looked almost amused, but not at me. "My mother's foundation funded it." My mother straightened. "Margaret's foundation? The Caldwell Preservation Foundation." Ethan was still looking at me. "Their consultant has been trying to get Mercer Conservation into the bidding process for Bellwether Hall." No one spoke. My father lowered his wineglass very carefully. Claire stared at the photograph on Ethan's phone as though it had betrayed her personally. My mother's face did something I had almost never seen. It lost its next sentence. Ethan looked from the screen back to me. "You're Rachel Mercer?" "Yes." He leaned back, astonishment giving way to recognition. "We've been trying to find out who are. Mercer is for almost a year." And sitting at the far end of my mother's table, I understood something before I had words for it. Outside that house, people already knew my work well. They simply did not know the woman who had done it was sitting right there with them. My mother waited until Claire and Ethan were in the living room with coffee before she cornered me in the kitchen. She was stacking dessert plates with the brisk precision she used whenever emotion threatened to become visible. "You are not taking that project." I had expected disapproval. The certainty of the sentence still surprised me. "I haven't been offered a project. You know what I mean." "No," I said. "Are you asking me not to pursue it or telling me?" She stopped with a plate in her hand. "I'm your mother." That's not an answer. I did not raise my voice, but something in the kitchen shifted anyway. My mother set the plate down. "Bellwether Hall is where Claire and Ethan are getting married." "What?" "August 19th. The deposit was paid last month." Everyone in Marlow Bend knew Bellwether, limestone, arched windows, a grand staircase, a ballroom ceiling older than our family. It was exactly the kind of venue my mother prized. If the restoration happens on their timeline, she continued, you'll be there for months. Scaffolding, equipment, work clothes. Margaret Caldwell will be walking through with donors and family. I would be working. That is exactly my point. No, I said. It's exactly mine. Her mouth tightened. Claire gets one wedding, and I get one career. I left before either of us could turn those sentences into something uglier. Later, Claire told me what happened in the car after Ethan drove her home. He waited until they were 3 blocks from our parents' house. Why did your family tell me Rachel was unemployed? Claire looked out the passenger window. Nobody said unemployed. Your mother said she was figuring things out. She is. Sort of, she owns a conservation studio. It's complicated. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. Does Rachel think it's complicated? Claire didn't answer. Did you know what she actually did? Of course I know what she does. That's not what I asked. Claire hated that sentence because there was nowhere decorative to put it. She finally said, Mom thinks it's easier if we keep things simple. Simple for whom? Claire had no answer for that either. She called me the next morning before 9. You made things weird last night. I was standing at my workbench, cataloging damage on a 19th century side table. I answered a question. You knew what Mom meant. That's becoming less persuasive. Claire exhaled hard. Ethan's family is different, Rachel. Everything matters with them. Apparently my work does. That's not what did Mom tell him about me before dinner? Silence. I put down my pencil. Claire, she said you were between things. I waited. And that you were still trying to figure out your direction. What else? That he shouldn't push you about work because it was kind of a sore subject. I looked around my studio. 3 projects sat in various stages of treatment. My invoices were late because I hated paperwork, not because I lacked work. A museum crate waited near the loading door. My calendar was booked 4 months ahead, so everyone at dinner knew except me. It wasn't some conspiracy. No, just a briefing. Mom wanted the evening to go well. For whom? That stopped her cold. The question had traveled from Ethan to Claire and now from me back to her. You weren't supposed to matter last night, Rachel. Neither of us spoke. I heard her inhale. That came out wrong. When I was 10, I won a blue ribbon at school for a wooden keepsake box I had made in shop club. I ran home carrying it against my chest. My mother looked at the ribbon, smiled, and said, That's nice, honey, go change. Claire's recital starts in 20 minutes. She had not insulted me. That was what made the memory last. There was always somewhere else we needed to be, someone else whose moment had already been scheduled. I learned early that love came easiest when I required little room. On the phone, Claire said, I didn't mean it like that. Maybe nobody ever does. I told her I had work to do and hung up. At 11:16, an email arrived from the Bellwether Preservation Trust. It was not an offer. It was an invitation to a site consultation and a request for qualifications. Firms selected from that stage would be asked to submit treatment proposals for the ballroom ceiling and grand staircase. I read it twice, then opened a reply. For years, decisions involving my family had felt as if they required a vote I could never quite win. This one didn't. I typed, Thank you for reaching out. I'd like to be considered. Then I signed my full name. Rachel Mercer. I did not become a conservator because I had a plan. At 18, I had a schedule. Accounting classes at the community college, a transfer application after 2 years, a degree that came with health insurance, predictable hours, and a title my mother could explain without adding a sentence afterward. Then, one October afternoon, I stayed late after choir practice at St. Anne's and watched an old man repair a water-damaged altar rail. His name was Walter Hale. He was 71, with hands permanently stained by walnut dust. I stood 6 feet away for nearly an hour before he finally said, without looking at me, If you're going to hover, you may as well hand me that clamp. The rail looked ruined to me. I asked whether it was. Walter ran a thumb beside a split in the wood. Nothing's hopeless, he said. Some things are waiting for somebody patient. By Thanksgiving, I had dropped accounting. My mother called it impulsive. Walter called it Tuesday. For 12 years, I learned beside him. Veneer, gilding, hide glue, shellac, the chemistry of old finishes. The difference between making something look new and helping it remain honestly old. Walter was suspicious of anyone who treated restoration like a magic trick. His first rule was simple. Don't do anything you can't undo. He made me document every treatment, photograph every loss, write down solvents, concentrations, dates, reasons. Later, I took conservation science courses, traveled for workshops, and learned the language institutions required alongside the knowledge Walter carried in his hands. He taught me how to see. Professional training taught me how to explain what I saw. Once, during my 6th year with him, I finished treating a federal period cabinet that had nearly come apart at the backboards. Walter walked around it twice. "Where's your mark? It doesn't need one. The cabinet doesn't." He looked at me. "You might." I laughed and changed the subject. Years later, when Walter died and left me the Millbury Street shop, I kept the old sign but shortened the name. Mercer Conservation. No first name, no photograph. It seemed modest at the time. Bellwether Hall was 38 miles away, and the first time I walked into its ballroom, I forgot every argument I had rehearsed about why I belonged there. The ceiling was painted in 1898, 4 seasonal panels surrounding a pale blue center, each figure softened beneath more than a century of soot, old varnish, and bad environmental control. Water had entered along the east wall at some point and left a long, tide-shaped stain through autumn. Several areas of paint were lifting. The plaster needed investigation before anybody touched the surface. The grand staircase had its own problems, worn finish, failed repairs, loosened decorative elements, but the ceiling held my attention. I spent 3 hours taking notes. The trust had invited 4 firms to the qualification stage. 2 weeks later, 3 of us were asked for treatment proposals. Mine did not pretend I could do everything alone. I proposed serving as lead architectural conservator, bringing in a wall painting specialist for pigment and plaster analysis, using a licensed scaffold contractor, and hiring a documentation photographer for condition mapping and final records. The full conservation package was projected at about $185,000. My professional fee over 9 months would be $48,000. The rest covered scaffolding, testing, specialist labor, materials, photography, insurance, and contingency. It was the largest project I had ever proposed. It was the first time I submitted something that large with my full name on the cover. Rachel Mercer. Not R. Mercer. Not Mercer Conservation alone. I gave the committee references. I answered technical questions for 90 minutes. I explained what I would not promise, which mattered as much as what I would. 10 days later, the trust director called. "We'd like to award Mercer Conservation the contract." I sat down on Walter's old stool before my knees embarrassed me. No Caldwell had handed it to me. No one had hired me because of Claire. I had been invited to compete. Then I had won. That mattered deeply. The contract came with one additional document. Bellwether Hall's restoration was being followed by a public television series called Made to Last. The production could film approved stages of the work, and the trust required professional credit in project materials. I read the media section twice. Then I requested one change. No personal interview, no profile segment. My name could appear in written credits, and my hands could appear if the work required it, but I did not want to be a face in the story. The producer agreed. I signed. At the time, I thought I was protecting my privacy. I did not yet understand how closely privacy can resemble disappearance. The first person to accuse me of rejecting an opportunity I had never received was a retired librarian carrying a grocery bag of apples. Her name was Mrs. Ellis. She found me in the Bellwether parking lot after my second site meeting, where I had spent the morning reviewing scaffold access with the contractor. "Rachel Mercer," she said. I turned. Mrs. Ellis had run the Marlow Bend Public Library for most of my childhood. "I'm still annoyed with you," she said. "That's a strong opening. You deserved it." She shifted the grocery bag to her other arm. "We invited you to our local craft exhibition 3 years ago. Historic trades, restoration, preservation. We wanted photographs from that church rail you worked on and the county museum pieces. You declined without even bothering to answer yourself." I stared at her. I never received an invitation. Mrs. Ellis stared back. "You absolutely did. Where did you send it?" She gave me the address, my parents' house. For a moment, neither of us said anything. When I was apprenticing with Walter, he added my name to a county arts and preservation directory. I had no business address then, so the contact was my parents' home. Local organizations later copied old directories into newer mailing lists. Mrs. Ellis noticed my face change. "Oh," she said. That afternoon, she forwarded me the email chain. The invitation asked me to speak about traditional repair methods and contribute before and after photographs. The reply had come from my mother's account. "Thank you for thinking of Rachel." My daughter is no longer working in this field, so please remove her from future correspondence. I read it 3 times, then I checked the date. That month, I had completed 2 museum treatments. My mother knew that. For a while, I tried to imagine an innocent explanation. Maybe she thought the invitation was outdated. Maybe she believed she was saving me from an obligation. But the sentence was too clean for that. It did not say I was busy. It said I had left the field entirely. I did not call her. Not yet. Instead, I started checking. Mrs. Ellis remembered another organization that had asked about me, and one name led to another. I was careful. Anger wants every missing thing to become evidence. I found 3, only 3. That was enough. The first was the library exhibition. The second was a county historical society talk on conserving family furniture. The third was Marlow Bend High School Career Day, seeking someone whose traditional trade connected science, history, and art. All 3 had gone to the old address. All 3 had been answered by my mother. All 3 replies were polite. Rachel is pursuing other things now. Rachel is no longer available for this kind of work. Please remove her from your contact list. I printed the emails and placed them side by side on my workbench. That was the part I remember most clearly. Not rage, not crying. Paper. 3 clean sheets under the shop light, each containing a small version of my disappearance in my mother's professional courtesy. For several minutes, I let myself believe the easiest version. She had done this to me. She had made me invisible. Then I looked up. The sign outside said Mercer Conservation, not Rachel Mercer. My website had photographs of 18th century desks, church woodwork, painted surfaces, damaged veneer, repaired carving. There was no photograph of me. My biography was 4 sentences long and written in the 3rd person. I remembered a reporter from the county paper asking to photograph me 2 years earlier. I had declined. A preservation podcast had invited me on. Declined. A museum newsletter had asked for a short profile after a complicated treatment. Declined. Those invitations had reached me. My mother had not touched them. I had. The realization did not excuse what she had done. There is a difference between privacy and having another person speak falsely in your name, and I would not erase it just because self-examination complicated the story. But the truth had 2 edges. My mother had closed 3 doors I never knew were open. I had quietly stood behind several others and turned the locks myself. Walter used to say that before treating damage, you had to identify what caused it. Otherwise, you were only making the surface prettier while the failure continued underneath. I sat at the bench until the afternoon light shifted. Then I gathered the 3 emails into a folder. I did not drive to my mother's house. I did not call Claire. I did not demand an explanation I was too angry to hear. The next morning, I went back to Bellwether. The scaffold had begun rising through the ballroom. I put on my hard hat, climbed to the first platform, and opened my condition notebook. My mother had taught me how to disappear. Somewhere along the way, I had become very good at doing it without her. For the first time, I wondered what would happen if I stopped. 2 years earlier, when the boiler in the Millbury Street shop began making a metallic knock every time the temperature dropped below 20, my parents had offered to contribute $20,000 toward replacing it. It was a promise, not an inheritance, and my mother made that distinction clear over Sunday pot roast. "We've decided the money should go toward the wedding instead," she said. She did not present the decision as punishment. That was never her style. She talked about deposits, guest counts, and family obligations as if numbers could turn preference into necessity. I listened because I had spent years mistaking her certainty for evidence that she was right about me. Claire looked down at her plate. My father took a drink of water. The boiler was 14 years past its recommended service life. Temperature mattered in conservation. Adhesives cured differently in a cold shop. Finishes clouded. Wood moved. Still, the money belonged to my parents. "If it's your money," I said, "you can spend it." My mother blinked. "That's all?" "No," I set down my fork. "If you spend it on the wedding, that's your choice. But you don't get to use it later as proof that my business couldn't survive without you." For once, she had no correction ready. Bellwether paid by milestone, and large projects behaved differently in a checking account than on paper. Subcontractors needed deposits. Insurance came due. The boiler did not care that my next payment was 6 weeks away, so I took night work. 3 evenings a week, I drove to Toledo and French-polished dining tables for a furniture dealer after the showroom closed. I worked at Bellwether by day and at the warehouse until midnight. I told nobody in my family. In December, my mother came to the studio. She stood among the clamps, drying racks, conservation files, and a carved mantle waiting for pickup, still wearing her wool coat. Her eyes settled on my coveralls. "You meet clients dressed like that? When I'm working." "Exactly." She walked past 12 years of my life without touching anything. Then she placed an envelope on my bench. $25,000. I looked at it. "For what?" "For you to withdraw from Bellwether." She said it calmly, almost kindly. "A business decision, enough to replace the boiler. Claire's wedding would be easier. The Caldwell family would never have to navigate construction schedules or see me on scaffolding during a walkthrough." "No." Rachel, listen to the number. I heard the number. "You're being emotional." The answer's still no. She stared at me for a long moment, not furious so much as confused by a door that had always opened for her. Then she picked up the envelope and left. 2 weeks later, my father arrived carrying a bakery box of thumbprint cookies. He wandered the shop slowly before sitting near the old radiator. "Did you know?" I asked. "Know what?" "That she was ashamed of me." His face changed. "Not like this." "That's not what I asked." He studied his hands. "I knew she worried about how your work looked to other people, and you let her tell them I was lost." I thought I was keeping the peace. "It helped," I said. "Just not me." He flinched, and I was glad he did. Then he told me something my mother had made him promise never to repeat. When Diane was 15, her father cleaned St. Catherine's School. He waxed floors, emptied trash, fixed toilets, shoveled snow before dawn. Some of the wealthier mothers knew. At pickup, they would drag their shoes across the polished floor when Diane passed. Squeak, squeak. Their daughters learned the joke. One winter, Diane's shoes were so worn she stuffed newspaper inside them to keep out the slush. "She showed me once when we were dating," my father said. "Never again." He looked around my shop. "When you quit accounting to work with Walter," she cried in the garage. "Because she thought the work was beneath me." "No." He shook his head. "Because she spent her whole life trying to get away from being the janitor's daughter, and she thought you were walking back toward everything she escaped." We sat quietly. "It doesn't make what she's doing right," he said. That mattered. I did not need an excuse for my mother. I needed the shape of the wound. For the first time, I understood that Diane did not hate old buildings, art, or preservation. She hated what my work clothes, ladders, stained hands, and workshop seemed to say about class. She had spent 40 years building a life nobody could sneer at. And without realizing it, she had begun asking me to live as proof that she had succeeded. I met Margaret Caldwell on a Wednesday morning in February, 6 weeks after the scaffold went up. She arrived in a charcoal suit and practical shoes, accepted a hard hat from the site manager, and climbed 3 levels of scaffold without asking whether anyone thought she should. She did not introduce herself as Ethan's mother. She looked at the east quadrant of the ceiling. "What's causing the flaking?" "Multiple things," I said. "Old moisture intrusion, incompatible repairs, and movement in the plaster. We're testing before we consolidate anything. And if moisture returns, we stop treating paint and fix the building problem first." She nodded. "Good. Put that plainly in the maintenance report. Trustees understand expensive repairs better when someone explains the expensive consequence of ignoring them." No surprise that I knew the answers. No comment about my clothes. She simply assumed I was the professional responsible for the work. The absence of surprise felt luxurious. Competence, in Margaret's presence, was not something I had to defend before anyone would recognize it. On her 3rd visit, Margaret stayed while I reviewed test areas with the wall painting specialist. When the others climbed down, she remained beside me. "Mercer," she said, "you're Claire's sister." "I am. I put that together from Ethan." A pause. "Odd. We were told you were between jobs." I kept my eyes on the painted border. "I'm rarely between jobs, mostly between invoices." Margaret laughed once. Then, without asking for an explanation, she returned to the condition report. That restraint was a kindness I did not know I had been missing. Claire came to the studio. She arrived carrying wedding fabric samples, which made the visit look accidental even though neither of us believed it was. She wandered. She read labels on storage boxes, studied the humidity monitor, picked up a cabinet scraper, and immediately put it down. She stopped in front of a 19th century mantle whose old finish I had spent days cleaning a square inch at a time. "You document all of this?" "Everything. And museums send things here?" "Sometimes." She looked embarrassed, not because of the shop, because she had not known. Finally, she sat on Walter's stool. "The Caldwells are nice," she said. "That sounds like bad news." She smiled despite herself. "They are, that's the problem." Claire had spent months learning a world she thought she wanted. Foundation dinners. Trustees. Family friends who remembered where they had met you 5 years ago. Wedding guests with titles and histories. Margaret was never rude, Claire said, which somehow made Claire more nervous. There was no obvious rule to rebel against. And Mom loves it, she said. She has spreadsheets for the wedding spreadsheets. That sounds like her. She scheduled the family photographs down to 6-minute blocks. I laughed. Claire did not. You think Mom controls you because she doesn't approve of what you do. She does. I know. Claire twisted a fabric sample around one finger. But do you know what happens when she does approve? I waited. She watches everything. My job, my apartment, my clothes, Ethan, the wedding. If I'm the daughter she's proud of, I have to keep being worth being proud of. I saw the arrangement from Claire's side. I had spent years believing she had been given the freedom I was denied. Maybe neither of us had been free. Nobody expects anything from you, Claire said. There was no cruelty in it. That made it worse. That's not freedom. Her eyes lifted. You think being the one everyone expects everything from is? No. She looked surprised. I used to, I added. The room went quiet. 2 daughters, 2 assignments. Mine had been take up less space. Claire's had been make the family look good. One of us had been hidden. The other had been displayed. Neither role had left much room for an actual person. Claire told me about a conversation with Ethan. They were addressing wedding invitations when he asked, "Can I ask you something you're going to hate?" Apparently. If we have a daughter someday and she chooses something your mother doesn't understand, what happens? Claire had put down her pen. That's not fair. Ethan did not argue. It may be the fairest question I've asked. Claire told me she had been angry for 2 days. Then she admitted the anger was not really at him. I don't know what I'd do, she said. I looked at my sister across the workbench. For most of our lives, I had thought Claire and I stood on opposite sides of our mother's approval. Now I wondered if we had simply been standing in different cells of the same house. The difference was that, for the first time, Claire had begun looking for the door. By the first week of August, I had spent so many hours above Bellwether's ballroom that the ceiling no longer felt overhead. It felt close enough to breathe. The final weeks were less romantic than people imagine restoration to be. There were treatment logs, retouching decisions, humidity readings, punch lists, photographs, inspections, and one long argument with a supplier over a shipment that arrived 2 days late. The work became beautiful only after enough ordinary problems had been solved correctly. On the last Friday, the scaffold came down. For 9 months, I had known the mural from inches away. Brush marks, old losses, tiny repairs no guest would ever notice. When the final tower rolled out and the room was empty, I walked to the center of the ballroom and looked up like everyone else would. I had to tilt my head back. That simple distance undid me. The winter figures were clear again. The water stain through autumn had been stabilized and reduced without pretending it had never existed. The blue center looked like sky instead of smoke. I heard Walter as clearly as if he were beside me. "Where's your mark?" Years ago, I had laughed. This time the building answered for me. The Bellwether Preservation Trust had a credit policy for major capital work. 2 days after final inspection, a small bronze plaque appeared beside the ballroom doors. Bellwether Hall Ceiling and Staircase Conservation Rachel Mercer, Lead Conservator Mercer Conservation, 2026 4 lines. That was all. I stood in front of them longer than I care to admit. My name looked almost too specific. For most of my career, I had believed good work should make the worker disappear. Now I wondered whether I had confused humility with absence. I heard heels behind me. My mother was crossing the foyer with Claire and the wedding planner. Diane stopped when she saw me. Then she saw the plaque. Her eyes moved across every line. Nothing changed in her face. She turned to the planner. "A fern would soften this corner, don't you think? Something tall." The planner tapped a note into her tablet. Claire looked at the plaque, then at our mother, then at me. Nobody said anything. The fern arrived 3 days later. By then, there was another problem. Months earlier, when Bellwether's management told Claire and Ethan that Made to Last wanted to film several minutes of the first major event after reopening, my mother had been delighted. National television. A restored historic hall. The Caldwell Preservation Foundation among the project funders. A wedding already important enough in her mind to deserve archiving. The production rider was narrow. Claire and Ethan agreed to a 3-minute preservation acknowledgement before cake. The crew could film wide shots of the ballroom and approved participants during that window. Guests would receive notice through the event materials, with designated areas for anyone who preferred not to appear. My mother had encouraged them to sign. "It will be lovely to have the room documented," she had said. At the time, none of us understood how much that sentence would matter. A week before the wedding, the made-to-last field producer called me. "We're building the bellwether segment," he said. "The trust will have a representative. The Caldwell Foundation will have someone there. We'd also like the lead conservator if you're willing. I have a no-interview provision. You do, this is optional." I said no. Then he added, "Just so you know, your name will still appear in the project credit. That's part of the trust documentation." I understand. I thought that settled it. My mother did not. The next afternoon, the producer called again. "I'm telling you this because it concerns you directly. Someone identifying herself as Diane Mercer contacted our production office." I closed my eyes. What did she want? To review our questions. I almost laughed. She also suggested the segment would be stronger if it focused on the foundation and the architecture rather than individual contractors. "Did she ask you not to film me?" A pause. "She asked us not to make you the story." Outside my office window, the Mercer Conservation sign hung exactly where it had hung for years. I thought of the 3 letters she had answered for me. The old directory, the family dinner, the fern now waiting beside my name at Bellwether. "She's been asking people that for years," I said. The producer was quiet. "We're not changing your agreement. If you don't want to appear, you won't." After we hung up, I sat at my desk. The strangest part was that my mother had created the problem herself. She had wanted the cameras because cameras meant prestige. She had simply assumed she could decide what they were allowed to see. For most of my life, that assumption had worked. The wedding was 7 days away. For the first time, the question was no longer whether my mother would let me be seen. It was whether, when the moment came, I would still choose to hide. Claire texted me at 8:07 on the morning of her wedding. "Please keep things simple tonight." I read it with one earring in. There were several answers I could have sent. Some were accurate and unkind. Others were kind and dishonest. I typed, "I'll be your sister, nothing less, nothing more." Claire replied with a heart. I wore a deep green dress that had never been near shellac, plaster dust, or a scaffold. Bellwether was almost unrecognizable as a worksite. White flowers climbed the staircase. Candles waited along the tables. The quartet tuned beneath the restored ceiling. Near the ballroom entrance stood the fern. It was taller than I expected. One broad frond crossed the bronze plaque, just enough to obscure my first name. I stopped. For 9 months, I had fixed what needed fixing. My hand nearly reached for the pot, then I let it fall. I was not going to spend Claire's wedding fighting a plant. The ceremony was beautiful. That mattered. Claire was my sister before she was part of any lesson I needed to learn. When she came down the staircase, Ethan looked at her with such open love that I forgot, for several minutes, every argument that had brought us there. I cried. My mother ran the day brilliantly. Elderly relatives were guided to seats. The photographer appeared precisely when needed. Dinner stayed nearly on schedule until Ethan's uncle gave a toast 8 minutes too long. That small delay would matter. Before dinner ended, I passed the ballroom doors again. The fern was gone. The plaque stood bare. I looked around. No one nearby seemed interested. I left it alone. A little later, the made-to-last producer approached. "Can I ask you something off camera?" "Sure. We've heard there's tension around your role here. If you wanted to address anyone interfering with your career, we would give you room. I'm not asking you to. I want you to know the option exists." For one dangerous second, I could see the version television would love: the letters, the lies, the $25,000 offer. A mother trying to erase her daughter until the daughter exposed her beneath the work she had tried to hide. It would be clean. Real life had not been. "No," I said. "You're sure? That's her story." I looked up at the ceiling. "I'm finally trying to tell mine." He nodded. "Then we leave it there." The preservation acknowledgement had been scheduled for 8:05, just before cake. My mother had scheduled family portraits for 8:00 to 8:15. I did not know that until 7:58 when she appeared beside my chair and said, "Pictures, now." But the long toast had pushed the reception behind, and the producer moved the segment 10 minutes rather than lose the lighting setup. Suddenly, both plans occupied the same 15 minutes. He came to my table. "Rachel, we're ready if you've reconsidered. You can still decline." Before I answered, my mother's hand closed around my elbow. "She's needed for family photographs." Her hostess smile never moved. She guided me through a service door into the quiet hallway behind the ballroom. Then the smile disappeared. "Not tonight. You approved tonight. I approved filming the room. You approved the preservation segment, not you turning yourself into the center of Claire's wedding. I didn't ask for any of this. You never say no when being noticed benefits you. That almost made me laugh. Who is us? She frowned. What? When you say don't embarrass us, who is us? Rachel, stop. Because every time you say it, you seem to mean you. Color rose in her face. You have no idea what it costs to build a respectable life. Dad told me about St. Catherine's. She went still. The shoes, I said. The newspaper. Your father cleaning the school. Your father had no right. Maybe not, but I understand why respectable feels like survival to you. You understand nothing. Maybe. I looked at her. But I've spent my whole life paying for something that happened to you before I was born. Her eyes filled. For the first time, I saw the 15-year-old girl crossing a polished floor while other girls made their shoes squeak behind her. Respectable is all I ever had, she said. There was no performance in her voice. I loved her then. That was the hardest part. Then keep it, I said. I'm not taking that from you. I gently lifted her hand from my arm. I'm only taking my name back. Her face closed again. If you walk through that door and make this about yourself, don't come to Sunday dinner. There it was, not money, not the project, belonging, the oldest currency in our family. I felt the cost before I answered. Okay. Her expression changed. I think she had expected an argument. Behind the service door, I heard the producer testing the microphone. My hand shook once, then steadied against the metal bar. For 35 years, I had mistaken being welcome for being allowed to disappear. Then I opened the door. When I stepped back into the ballroom, nobody was looking at me. They were looking up. The house lights had been lowered, and the production crew had brought up the ceiling wash. For most of the evening, Bellwether's mural had hovered above the reception like a quiet witness. Now the restored blues, ochres, and greens seemed to move forward out of the plaster. Conversations thinned into silence. The host from Made to Last stood near the dance floor beside the trust director. A camera operator tracked slowly along the edge of the room. This will only take a few minutes, the host said. Before cake, Bellwether Preservation Trust wanted to recognize the work that brought this room back. No one had hijacked Claire's wedding. Claire and Ethan had approved this moment months ago. My mother had encouraged it. That mattered to me more than revenge ever could. The trust director said a few words about the restoration, the donors, and the specialists involved. Then the host turned toward me. Rachel, what did it take to bring this room back? My first instinct was still to make the answer smaller. I felt it rise automatically. A little shrug. A technical phrase, some way of moving attention back toward the building. Instead, I looked at the camera. 9 months of work, I said, and about a century of people deciding this place was worth saving. A few people laughed softly. My name is Rachel Mercer. I led the conservation of the ceiling and grand staircase. There it was, no apology after it, no qualification. The host glanced upward. Who taught you to see a room like this? Walter Hale. I apprenticed with him for 12 years. I could almost smell his shop when I said his name. He used to tell me, we don't hide the cracks. We make them strong enough to hold. That's most of conservation, really. You don't pretend nothing ever failed. You understand what happened, stabilize what you can, and let the object remain honest about having survived. The room was very quiet. The host waited a beat. And what does it feel like to see your family celebrating here tonight? The question opened a door. Behind it were 3 emails, an envelope with $25,000, a fern, and a woman in a hallway telling me belonging had conditions. I could have walked through. Instead, I looked at Claire. She stood beside Ethan in her wedding dress, one hand wrapped around his. Tonight belongs to my sister, I said. I'm just glad the room got to be ready for her. Claire covered her mouth. Someone started clapping near the front. Margaret Caldwell stood first. Ethan stood beside her, then my father. Claire rose next, still holding Ethan's hand. The rest of the room followed in uneven waves. I did not feel victorious. That surprised me. I felt visible. There is a difference. When the applause ended and the crew moved on, I looked toward my family's table. My mother's chair was empty. I let it be empty. My father found me later near the ballroom doors. For a while, he stood beside me without saying anything. Then he looked at the plaque. The janitor's granddaughter, he said. I turned toward him. His eyes were wet. Look what you built. Something in my chest loosened, not because he had finally approved of me, because he had taken the part of our history my mother had spent a lifetime trying to escape and spoken it without shame. Claire came over after him, barefoot now, her shoes abandoned somewhere under a table. Her mascara had survived better than either of us. She looked at the plaque, then at me. The fern was me. I blinked. You moved it. She told the planner to put it back. I told the planner the bride wanted it gone. Despite everything, I laughed. I thought maybe the venue moved it. No, Claire folded her arms. I moved it. Then her voice softened. I should have moved it years ago. It was not a complete apology. It was better. Complete apologies are usually speeches. Real change often looks like moving one thing that should never have been there. I hugged my sister under the ceiling I had restored for her wedding. For once, neither of us was hidden or displayed. We were simply two women standing in the same room, trying to learn what our names meant when our mother was no longer assigning them. Nothing miraculous happened the next morning. That was important. My phone did not contain messages from 10 museums. There was no national audience waiting outside my shop. Made to Last would not air the Bellwether episode until spring. What I had instead were 3 ordinary signs that something had shifted. A museum trustee who had attended the wedding asked for my card. A member of a church preservation committee wanted to discuss a damaged sanctuary. Margaret sent an email introducing me to a colleague who managed historic properties. Real careers usually changed that way. Through one door, then another. When the episode aired 7 months later, the volume changed. The Bellwether segment lasted 11 minutes. I was on screen for less than one. That was enough. Inquiries came from museums, churches, private collectors, an auction house, and a university preservation program. Within a year, Mercer Conservation was booked nearly 3 years out. I hired 2 apprentices. I replaced the boiler. I paid for it myself. That mattered more than I expected. The television attention eventually faded, which was healthy. What remained were deadlines, invoices, difficult treatments, apprentices asking good questions, and the steady satisfaction of work that no longer needed an audience to feel real. But success did not repair my family. Sunday dinners continued without me. For the first few months, 5 o'clock on Sunday felt like a phantom limb. I would look at the clock and imagine my father carving something, Claire arriving late, my mother setting out serving dishes as if nothing in the world could alter the schedule. Then one Sunday I looked up and it was 7. I had been working. I had not been hungry. My father began visiting the studio every other Wednesday. He brought coffee, sat in the good chair, and learned the names of adhesives with terrible pronunciation. He never carried messages from my mother. He never told me I should forgive her. He simply kept coming. That was how he apologized. Claire came too, though less predictably. One afternoon, she brought our grandmother's small jewelry box with a hinge pulled out of the wood. She sat on Walter's stool while I examined it. "Can you fix it?" "Yes." "How?" I showed her. She stayed for 2 hours asking real questions. We were not becoming the sisters we had been before. We were becoming women who might actually know each other. My mother and I did not have a grand reconciliation. Months passed with little contact. Then my father mentioned casually, "Your mother told Mrs. Collins you're conserving the courthouse." My hand stopped over a tray of tools. "She said conserving?" He smiled into his coffee. "She did. One word. I decided not to make it carry more weight than it could. In October, Dad arrived with something wrapped in a dish towel, our grandmother's teacup. The good one. It had broken into 3 pieces. Inside the towel was a note in my mother's handwriting. "If you have time." No apology, no explanation, no signature. I placed the cup on my bench, then I left it there for 4 days. That delay mattered. For most of my life, my mother's need had become my instruction before I even decided whether I wanted to help. This time I chose. I cleaned the breaks, used a reversible conservation adhesive, filled the losses, and toned the repaired seams with the faintest trace of gold. Not enough to disguise the break, enough to honor it. I sent the cup back without an invoice. Some things can be repaired without returning to what they were. A few weeks later, a woman I had never met walked into the studio carrying photographs of a damaged mantle. She looked from the sign outside to me. "Are you Rachel Mercer?" "Yes." "The conservator." Years earlier, I might have laughed and said, "Sort of." I might have explained too much. I might have made myself easier to underestimate before anyone else had the chance. Instead, I said, "Yes, I am." She opened her folder and we went to work. For years, I thought what I needed was for my mother to finally say my name correctly. I was wrong. What I needed was to stop waiting for her to say it first. You can spend your whole life waiting for your family to tell the truth about who you are. Or you can say your own name and let the work answer the rest.